Anyone who's been with me for a while knows that I'm not a particularly religious person, and indeed I'm not a believer at all. But I do find value in certain religious things as literature. And every now and then there's a quotation or a line from the Bible that I find valuable and one that really speaks to me and perhaps to some fundamental truth. So the one I'd like to mention before proceeding with this video would be the Gospel according to John 8:7. This is the famous scene where Jesus is presented with this adulterer woman by the Pharisees, and they cite the Old Testament punishment of stoning her, and to offer the direct quote, "So when they continued asking him, he lifted up himself and said unto them, He that is without sin among you, let him first cast a stone at her." Lesson here being that none of us is perfect, that we all have failings and flaws, and that perhaps we should not be too hasty in our judgment as we oftentimes are. Now recently, and this is a partial inspiration for this video, but it's a broader concern I've had for a very, very long time, perhaps since, well, forever. Hugh Mann, the great Antipodean lord, made a video about sympathy as well as a general lack of compassion. Specifically, he was referencing people in his comment section. I don't know who these people are. It doesn't really matter. But the broader topic of compassion and understanding is one that is near and dear to my heart, specifically with respects to men. Now, I don't think you'll find anybody in all of the Manosphere who will claim that there is some surplus of compassion and understanding directed towards men in the world. You need only look at the world and the landscape surrounding you to realize that if someone made that claim, it would be absolutely, irrefutably false. Whether it comes to homelessness rates, rates of suicide, rates of social isolation, etc., etc. All these things afflict men with greater frequency than they do women. And I'm not pointing this out necessarily as a contest. I'm not fond of these contests, sort of tit for tat. But the bottom line, the matter of fact here is that there is a dearth of compassion for men. There's a shortage. Absolutely. Most people don't give a shit. Whereas as a group, collectively, many people do give a damn about women in a way they simply don't about men. And sometimes, unfortunately, when I look at the Manosphere, I see this same consistency, this lack of compassion. Not to make the claim that many in the Manosphere have compassion towards women, but it's conspicuously absent with regards to men. And that puzzles me. You see, long ago, I realized something fundamental, something along the lines of what Jesus is saying, that as horribly imperfect as I am, as sinful as I am, I don't mean this in any metaphysical or biblical sense, but simply a flawed human being, I need to be very cautious in rushing to judgment on people and condemning what they do and who they are. That's particularly true of qualities that are, quote unquote, beyond their control. But the point I'm making is, where is the compassion directed towards men for the suffering of men, especially when men make mistakes? There seems to be a strange phenomenon afoot here. You get sometimes, maybe even often, red pill men who find the suffering of blue pilled men amusing. Something along the lines of, oh, that fool who got married and got divorced, you know what, etc., etc. It's all his own fault. He should have been more informed. Or even if he should not have been more informed, it's a funny thing that he is slowly but surely losing his life and he needs to learn these lessons. Well, it might be that he needs to learn these lessons. But all of us walk about the world in different states of knowledge. What one man knows is completely cut off to another man and vice versa. And I stressed this in my previous video. that no one can ever have complete knowledge. And one thing I've always been consistent about is I try not to judge too harshly where perhaps I might have made a more informed decision. And I would hope, although it's not often rendered unto me, that the like would be applied to me. You see, no man is an island. That's absolutely true, to quote John Donne. And we all falter, we all fall, we all make mistakes, we all shrug, as I said in my previous video. And it's a very sad matter indeed to see men who are well informed on so-called Manosphere issues and the struggles and difficulties that those who are penally endowed as we are have, laugh and find amusement in the suffering of other men, whatever it might be. And oftentimes it simply comes down to factionalism, does it not? Our innate tribalism. One tribe versus another, in this case, some faction of the Manosphere versus another one, or maybe somebody just not attached. You see, I'm not claiming I'm right about this, but I can tell you my view, one of the key components of my own personal philosophy as I interact with people, whether it's on the internet or in real life. And this is something that's very important to me. And that is simply the way I look at life. It's brief, short, and filled with suffering. So why on earth would I go out of my way to increase that? Would I not try to diminish suffering where I could and bring about understanding that might help diminish suffering? Would I not try to understand another man's position, even if that's a position that I myself could never conceive of for myself? So for example, I've met quite a few men who are aware of gender issues, but they want families, they want this, they want that. Some of them have even gotten into some trouble in the sense that they married the wrong woman, had a few children with them. Now that's not a life path that I would have taken, and I've not taken that life path, but at the same time, I want to understand these men. I'm sympathetic. I worry for them. I think it's a terrible situation to be in. For example, marrying a woman who is fundamentally incompatible with you, but you nonetheless have children with. And maybe for purists out there, these types of men are to be shunned and not talked to, but maybe then again, I'm not a purist. I think that these men are as deserving of understanding and compassion as anyone else. I'm not playing the factions game here, even though I most certainly am going my own way. I don't need to proclaim that to the world, and I can act as an individual, as a person, as a man, towards other men, in a way that befits my own personal code of conduct, and that does entail compassion and understanding. Even if I encounter men, like I said, that have very little in common with me, I still want to understand their situation, listen to their story. Maybe I can help them. More often than not, I cannot, but still, you can tell, and I've experienced this many times talking to these men, that sometimes all men need is an open ear that's willing to listen to them, an ear that is far too rarely actually granted to them in real life by supposed friends, certainly not by their spouses or their girlfriends. And so when you're there to listen, that's a big deal. Why must we cast stones at men who may have made mistakes that we have not when we make our own mistakes? And we all will. That's what life is about. It's about stumbling, faltering, falling down, sometimes getting back up, sometimes partially getting back up, sometimes never getting back up. And the minute you realize that, essentially we're all playing the same game, albeit in different ways. And maybe that merits compassion and understanding. There are millions and millions and millions of men out there, all doing their own thing. And even amongst men going their own way, well, we're all doing our own thing. And I don't need to be in exactly the same camp as another man to make an effort to try to understand him, or even help him if I can, if I'm capable. And so it's a real shame, an outright shame, that there's so many men, and I'm not talking about any specific man, I'm just talking about men in broad terms, who would delight in the suffering and the downfall of other men for simply having made mistakes, for simply being ignorant, for simply existing effectively, because human existence does entail making mistakes. And who am I to castigate these men? Who am I to say, well, that mistake is acceptable, but this mistake is not? I simply cannot arrogate that to myself because of my own flawed nature. And I just wish that more men would take a step back and realize that we're all in the same boat. Admittedly, many of us are using different shaped paddles, and the intermediary goals before oblivion claims us tend to be quite different, sometimes very, very varied and differentiated. But we are all in the same boat, give or take. And so in condemning one man, I am necessarily condemning myself. I don't see discontinuity there, I see continuity. Even if the interests are vastly different, even if we come from vastly different places, both geographically, politically, philosophically, etc., I still want to understand his story. I still want to get him. And the amount of appreciation a man can show for that, recognizing that he is valuable enough not as that utility that the entirety of the world, save you in that moment, views him as, is immense. You're actually acknowledging that he does have humanity when you show him understanding, when you open up your ears, when you listen to his story. That's compassion. And the judgment and the gavel, this is not much better than all the other BS that he has to deal with. And I can't understand this callousness and sometimes cruelty I see exercised in taking down other men and saying that they're quote-unquote bad because they made some mistake. So Hugh Mann brought up in that video some hypothetical example. What if he were to stumble or fall or make a mistake? What if he were to fall in love, whatever that means, and let his emotions get the best of him? Are you going to condemn him then? Are you going to call him a sucker, a fool, a cuck? Well, some of you might do that, but I wouldn't do that. People make mistakes. And I'm not saying he's made that mistake. This is a hypothetical. But people make mistakes all the time. Men make mistakes. Sometimes men use the wrong paddle to guide their boat to the goal. All these things are possible. And I think we need a lot more of this understanding, this realization that we are in the same boat, however different the pathways might be, shape and size of the paddles. And ideally, we should afford men that willing ear, that understanding that they're far too often denied by every other sector, faction, person in society. Please do not turn men into utilities for your own judgment and your own ego, just as the rest of the world turns men into utilities to get the jobs done they want done. That's all I really have to say on this matter. But it is an important one, and I hope going forward we can all improve, myself included, as I am ever fallible and ever flawed. Until the next time, may the gods watch over you. Bye-bye, and take care. If you liked this video, please like, share, and subscribe. And if you enjoy my content, please consider making a donation or becoming a patron. Thanks for watching.